Hello, my name is Sarah Nilsson. This presentation will be on Airspace, what it is, and why it's important to you as a UAS operator. During this presentation, you will learn why the FAA regulates airspace, the different classifications, and when you will need an airspace authorization before you fly. Many UAS operators are unaware that the sky is full of aircraft other than commercial airliners. When you fly your drone, you're sharing the airspace with corporate jets, helicopters, commercial airliners, and thousands of private aircraft operating from any one of the United States' 5,000 plus public airports. In addition to these aircraft, many parts of the country have extensive military operations, which include low-level and high-speed flying. The potential for aircraft collision is not as remote as one might think. Every day, the FAA receives reports where pilots of manned aircraft observed a drone that was either too close, too high, or operating in an area which caused an unnecessary increase in risk. If you're new to the drone community, it's easy to think you will be able to see and avoid airplanes in your area. However, it's possible to misjudge the altitude you and other aircraft are flying at. You may think that you are flying at a height that won't interfere with any other aircraft. The trouble is, aircraft may be flying lower than you think, and you may not see it until it's too late. Crop dusters, emergency medical aircraft, and patrol aircraft all routinely operate at altitudes less than 500 feet above ground level. Most drone flying is limited to 400 feet above ground level. Many people have wondered why the FAA selected 400 feet as the maximum altitude for flying your drone. The FAA reviewed considerable input from industry organizations and private individuals regarding this topic prior to the final rule being published under Part 107. 400 feet is a sweet spot which allows for a majority of UAS operations to be conducted while still providing a margin of safety for most manned aircraft operations, which occur above 500 feet. To help decrease the risk of aircraft conflicting with one another, the FAA has segregated airspace into different categories. The most important ones for drone operators to be aware of are controlled, uncontrolled, special use, and temporary flight restrictions. Two of the most misunderstood terms regarding airspace are controlled and uncontrolled. Both are generic terms the FAA uses to describe certain responsibilities and services provided by air traffic control. More on that in a bit. First, let's take a look at air traffic control's role. Air traffic control's primary purpose is to prevent collisions between aircraft and organizing and expediting their flight. The requirement to get an authorization to fly your drone in controlled airspace provides air traffic control visibility into your planned flight. In order to fulfill their role, air traffic control must be aware of all aircraft in their airspace at all times. It's important to note that based on higher priority duties or other circumstances, authorization from air traffic control may not always be granted. This is true for both unmanned and manned aircraft. Airspace in which air traffic control services are provided, such as authorizing takeoffs and landings and route clearances, is called controlled airspace. All pilots, including drone operators, need to be aware of how the FAA has segmented controlled airspace. These segments are known as classes of airspace, and there are 5. Class Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo. Generally speaking, you must receive authorization from air traffic control before flying in controlled airspace. Before you fly, it's important to know what requirements you as a drone pilot are required to meet. Remember, the National Airspace System is the safest airspace in the world, and safely integrating drones requires that you understand and comply with the rules. If you plan to fly in controlled airspace, you generally must have approval from the FAA before doing so. This is known as an airspace authorization. Airspace authorizations can only be issued by air traffic control through an approved land service supplier or drone zone. If you're wondering why you need an authorization to fly in controlled airspace, consider this. Every time you fly on a commercial airliner, the pilot has to request permission to fly the route they have planned. This is to ensure there are no hazards or other airplanes in its flight path that could cause a conflict. It's the same with drones. Air traffic control needs to have an understanding of what aircraft are operating in controlled airspace to maintain the ability to separate all aircraft. This is all part of the FAA's mission to fully integrate drones into the national airspace system. Safe integration requires that we all work together to ensure our airspace system remains the safest in the world. Uncontrolled airspace, otherwise known as Class Golf, is any airspace outside of Class Alpha Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo. We use the term uncontrolled because from an air traffic control standpoint, they are not responsible for separating aircraft in these areas. However, people assume uncontrolled means something like a free-for-all. This is an incorrect assumption. There are still rules and regulations which apply to all aircraft, manned and unmanned, operating in this airspace. It's these rules and regulations that ensure aircraft do not conflict with each other. Class Golf airspace typically begins at the surface and extends upward to the next airspace layer, which varies depending on where you are operating. That next airspace layer is normally Class Echo, because Echo may begin at different altitudes depending on air traffic control needs. It's important to know where you are flying and what airspace is above you. For operations in uncontrolled airspace, air traffic control authorization is not needed. However, there are still rules and regulations for operating in this class of airspace. Regardless of which airspace you intend to fly in, it is your responsibility as the pilot to ensure that you are aware of any airspace restrictions in your operational area. Temporary flight restrictions may have been issued for the location or time you want to fly. You can find them in the FAA TFR database. This presentation has been on airspace, what it is, and why it's important to you as a UAS operator. Thank you for your time and attention.